So greetings to one and all, this is Vaibhav Agrawal and today we have Lt Col Shreesh Kumar, who is a veteran officer and has played his role in the Ipkf operations in Sri Lanka. He comes from the Corps of Engineers, Bombay Sappers. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you here, sir.
Thank you, Vaibhav. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be on Frontier India and speak about my experience in Pawan.
Thank you very much, sir. And before we come to the crux of the interview, I would like to ask, and the audience would love to know, what was the prelude to the Ipkf operations and when did you came at the forefront?
Prelude to the Ipkf operations basically means the Indo-Sri Lanka Accord signed between Jayawardena and our Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Prior to that, there was a lot of trouble in the Jaffna province and the other Tamil areas of Vavuniya, Trincomalee and Batticaloa. And things were not good between the local Sinhalese and the Tamils. And fact is that the Tamils were being encouraged by India and we were in full support of their demands because they were being given second-class status within Sri Lanka.
Right.
And as far as human rights are concerned, it was not acceptable to us. Therefore, they had our support and the Sri Lankan government dominated by the Sinhalese basically, they realized that and they had to get into an agreement with us. So that is one part. Second part is, as far as we are concerned, as far as the units are concerned, the army is concerned, we had just wound up from exercise Brass Tacks in Rajasthan. That was the biggest exercise ever conducted in 4 phases, BT1 to BT4, Brass Tacks 1 to 4 in Rajasthan in the deserts. And it was a kind of a rehearsal to, probably threaten Pakistan. But then after BT4, all plans fizzled out because General Ziaul Haq again outwitted our, the government. Right. He said, I am from Jaipur College and he wanted to attend the cricket match in Jaipur. And so that is how any chance of operations into Pakistan fizzled out. Subsequent to that, if I remember correctly, April 1987, we returned from the desert. My unit was in Sagar. We were part of 36 Rapid Division. Okay. That's called 36, it's an infantry division basically, but 36 reorganized army planes infantry division. And we came back and sooner than later we were told to train for particular operations. We were not told what's in the offing, but we were asked to get ready and practice our drills and other operational matters. So some of us moved to Gwalior and my brigade per se, 72 Infantry Brigade, we moved to, we were on a particular move, but then it was diverted and we were sent to Bangalore. So we were in waiting at Bangalore, a few hours notice. Then as you would have heard before from other veterans also, and you would have read in various places, Indian Navy took a few ships, relief material in terms of rations and medicines were sent by sea, and that was basically for the local population of Jaffna. But they were turned back by the Sri Lankan Navy. Subsequent to that, our transport aircraft went and dropped relief supplies in Jaffna, and they were escorted by a fighter aircraft just in case any threat comes to those aircraft. So this was the prelude. Now this was the setting under which the Ipkf had to go there. So as per the accord, the military portion of it was that we had a commitment to go send troops to Sri Lanka, the northern and eastern areas. And again, Jaffna, Vavuniya, Trincomalee and Batticaloa. Basically to maintain peace. So there's a truce between, there was to be a truce between the Sri Lankan army and the LTT and other groups. There were other groups, mind you, it was not just the LTT. So there was EROS, that is the students wing of LTT, the Elam Revolutionary Organization of Students. There was TELO, Tamil Elam Liberation Organization. There was ENDLF, Elam National Democratic Liberation Front. There was EPRLF, Elam People's Revolutionary Front. So there was PLOT, People's Liberation Organization of Tamil Elam.
Okay.
They are the guys who later on, they tried something funny in Maldives, but then our para brigade went there and sorted them out, right? So, uh, July 29th, the first troops landed in Jaffna, and the Sri Lankan army was there holding fort. So, they were briefed by the Sri Lankan army, and then subsequent waves of aircraft and ships landed our troops there. So, July 29th to October 10th, basically, things were okay. There were no hostilities. In fact, our army officers and troops were hobnobbing with LTT, and they had become friends, and there was a lot of bonhomie between the Indian Army and the locals and the LTT and other groups. You must have heard about those leaders who were captured by the Sri Lankan Navy on the high seas.
Yes.
Yeah. So they were brought into Palali, and they wanted to take them to Colombo for interrogation, and they were top leaders in that. But the Indian Army and the Indian government held them at bay. They said not yet. Okay. But subsequently what happened was there was some miscommunication, or rather there was no communication at all, or no firm decision taken. In the bargain, the Sri Lankan army was allowed to take them to Colombo. I mean, the go ahead was given. So at that very instant, these fellows committed suicide or attempted suicide by biting cyanide capsules. So that in short is what happened. The moment that happened, some of them died, a couple of them survived. Consequent to that, Prabhakaran declared hostilities, and they started attacking the Indian Army troops deployed there in Jaffna. So that is the time when hostilities started. Now my unit, as part of 36 Infantry Div, in my case we have field companies. So we have 3 field companies, that is, they are basically fighting engineer elements. Each company is allotted to a infantry brigade. An infantry brigade is a fighting element of 3 battalions, infantry battalions. Although we were part of 36 Infantry Div, we were inducted into Jaffna, and 36 Infantry Div headquarters went and established itself in Trincomalee.
Okay.
Trincomalee, Clappenburg Bay. And when we went to Jaffna, we came under command 54 Infantry Div. Right, the troops which were already there, the formation which was already there, subsequent to the accord, peace accord, we went under command them. And the initial part of the operation, the appreciation was at the highest level that if you neutralize and capture the LTT headquarters in Jaffna town, then things will come to a standstill. I mean, that was the understanding. But there was a flaw in the understanding. And so, although we attacked on 5 different axes, 5 brigades, infantry brigades, along with associated troops like sappers, signals, we attacked, we succeeded. It was a very extensive operation. It took about 2 weeks to overcome all opposition and finally take charge of Jaffna town. Right. Okay. In that we suffered tremendous casualties. Now, if I have to look back in hindsight, I feel, if you ask me what was the decision, was it right, was it wise, I would say we could have done much better. First of all, at the level of government, they should have given adequate time to the army to prepare and launch operations. But from the government side, if I have to think and say, I would say that we were going there for a peacekeeping operation.
Correct.
So where's the question of asking you to prepare, right? So I wouldn't fault the government. I would rather say that the army could have done better, because the top leadership of the army should have had an assessment of how things would go wrong, or how can things go wrong. Possibilities. In this kind of a geopolitical situation, what are the possibilities? I mean, if you just have to follow orders, there's no point. Then you don't need to think. But at the highest levels, at the top leadership of the army, we ought to have thought it over. We ought to have prepared for it. Now, the gravity of the situation was such that people had prepared load tables for a particular type of aircraft, for a particular type of launch. And then when they realized that no, now you have to go into action operations. It's not just a peacekeeping role. I am talking of the troops who were inducted subsequently. People like us, when hostilities broke out, we were inducted, right? So the load tables were for peacekeeping force,
Right.
and preparations was similar to that. But what we basically required was, we required all our weapon systems, we required our ammunition, explosives, mines. We didn't carry all of the inventory. We went there with limited resources, and then we were launched into operations. So what I am saying is that we could have done much better by having an appreciation of how things could pan out, and also knowing, see, the truth is that we did train the LTT
Right.
and the other groups. So we knew their caliber. If we didn't know their caliber, that is our fault, right? And to say that they were our boys, but they turned against us, I mean, in geopolitical analysis and situations, you don't say like that. You have to be prepared for everything. You can't take anything for granted. So the first flaw was that we didn't realize what their caliber was. When they started fighting us, or prior to hostilities, we took them for granted. Oh, these chaps can be overcome within a week or something like that. But that was not the case. It took 2 weeks to take Jaffna, because the LTT fought like a professional fighting force. And all credit to them. They were a worthy enemy, full respect, regard for their fighting abilities. The outstanding quality of LTT is that they had brains with brawn. It was not just brawn. I mean, they were not people who would bash on regardless or something. They had brains and brawn. So we did face a worthy enemy, but nevertheless, we regained our balance in due course, and we could succeed. And the Indian Army is always like that. We regain our balance quickly. Unlike other forces, we regain our balance quickly. Not just the Army, the Navy and the Air Force did a wonderful job. The Air Force inducted troops at great speed, multiple sorties in a day. The Navy was patrolling the waters between Jaffna and India, and that's how the hostilities started. So, yeah.
As I understand, all the haste that was carried out, and limited time for preparing and getting equipped, limited resources. Why was the government in such a haste, and was it really necessary at that particular time?
Well, that's a good question. I do not think that the government was in a haste.
Okay.
The government, there is enough wisdom among the people running the government, whichever party it might be. There's enough wisdom for them to listen to the army leadership, the top leadership of the army. And they are bound to listen to their appreciation and give them directions or orders accordingly. If you remember, in the 71 war, when Mrs. Gandhi, who was the then Prime Minister, dynamic leader, when she asked General Manekshaw about getting into East Pakistan and liberating the country, he gave a proper appreciation to her. He told her, "Madam, it will take me 6 months to make the preparations." And at that particular time when she asked, the main point that he told her was that the rivers will be flooded and there will be water all over. It will be difficult for our heavy equipment to move. And so she understood. And she gave him that time, and our forces prepared adequately, the Air Force, Navy and the Army, and then we went in and we succeeded. The rest is history, how we launched and how we succeeded. Similar was the case here. If the accord was not subscribed to by Mr. Prabhakaran, the leader of the LTT, we should have had a premonition that at some stage these guys are going to break the truce and become hostile. We should have been prepared for that, and we should have sent our troops with due preparations, which was not done. We landed up there the 3 odd months that our division in Jaffna, they spent there with minimum resources, minimum equipment, with the assumption that there won't be any hostilities. We are just here to do a peacekeeping job,
Yeah.
right? And all of a sudden, the LTT took us by surprise. So, in military operations, surprise element is one of the primary keys to success, which we didn't anticipate. So, yes, we got to admit it was a failure of understanding the tactical and the strategic situation. So, we should have had that premonition that if something goes wrong, how are we poised to face the onslaught of the LTT, right?
And what were the immediate challenges that, apart from the rations, the resources, how I would say tricky were the LTTs with your brigade or?
Okay, see, I'll tell you about my example. I am from 270 Engineer Regiment. We belong to the Bombay Sappers. My unit, we moved from Sagar, like I told you before. So, there were 3 field companies. All the 3 field companies were inducted into Jaffna for the operations. Now, my move to Jaffna was by ship. I was loaded with my platoon onto a LST. LST is a landing ship tanks. So, that LST is like a tube, INS Sharab. It's like a tube, it keeps rolling. So, there were 5 BMPs, infantry combat vehicles, loaded onto that with the troop commander, and me, the engineer platoon commander, with my platoon. We were loaded onto the ship, and we sailed overnight, reached Jaffna. We were to deboard at Kankesanturai, but then the ship couldn't come alongside the jetty because it was damaged. Jetty was damaged, and there was a shipwreck there. LTT had, wrecked a ship there so that nobody could use that jetty. So, the infantry combat vehicles had to be beached. So, they had selected a beaching site. But what about us? So, we had to be transported to another ship. So, L36, a troop carrier, that came alongside. A gangplank was laid, and we walked on that. And I was a second lieutenant, a youngster, 21 years old, and we crossed over with my platoon, and that ship L36 then took us and dropped us off at a particular point.
Okay.
We were taken into boats of the Sri Lankan Navy, small boats, and then we were taken to the shore, and from there we inducted. Now, after inducting there, I reached Palali. Now, I didn't know where the other part of my company was, my field company. I had to look for it myself. There was total chaos. So, there were aircraft landing. Indian Airlines aircraft were chartered to fly in troops. So, there were Indian Airlines aircrafts also landing troops, but we had come by sea. And once we reached Palali, then there's a place called Chunagam. Then Urumparai, we were launched into operations there. Or rather, I met up with my company there, the balance of my company commander, my company second in command were already there.
Okay.
Then we joined up, and then we moved into operations. So, after the capture of Jaffna, my brigade, 72 Infantry Brigade, we saw a lot of action, and in fact, one of our battalion commanders was killed in action, Lieutenant Colonel IBS Bawa and Major NJD Singh of 45 GR, right. Then we had 13 Sikalai. You must have heard of the heliborne operations.
Right.
One entire platoon became KIA, Major Birinder and the platoon. So, I was attached with 13 Sikalai for the operations as a youngster, as a platoon commander. So, 72 Infantry Brigade was then moved to Vavonia, a Vavonia sector, and we were taken by aircraft and dropped off at Vavonia. The entire brigade, 72 Brigade, we moved to Vavonia, and then from there we were launched into operations. Now, as regards the challenges that you just asked about, first of all, we didn't have maps that everybody has mentioned. We were using tourist maps. But as a sapper, as a Corps of Engineers operative, I mean, we are supposed to lead the way. We are supposed to demolish obstacles created by the enemy, obstacles created to delay the move and deny success to the advancing force. So what do? We are supposed to clear the path. We are pathfinders and we clear the path. So it was a big challenge in the sense that we had equipment imported from Austria, mine detector. We call it Metex mine detector.
Okay.
So what does the mine detector do? It is basically a metal detector. It detects metallic constituents, components, right? And there's a particular depth beyond which it cannot detect. What did the LTT do? They were aware of that.
What was the approx depth that it could?
It's about half a meter.
Okay.
In soil which is loose.
Okay.
If it is high, very dense soil, then it's less than that, right? Typically, in a minefield, your anti-personnel mines or your anti-tank mines are buried about an inch below the ground. So it's easy to detect that because they have metallic components. These fellows had used entirely plastic containers, jerry cans, plastic drums, paint ke dabbe, which are plastic.
Okay.
So they were very smart. See, brain and brawn both. And the only metallic component in that entire thing would be the detonator. So the detonator is aluminum, and that would be right at the bottom. So that it's impossible to detect that, right? You run a Metex, it won't detect. And they ran the wire, the command wire, to a remote location inside a house, and they would connect it to a power source and just pull the switch. So power comes, the detonator explodes. It's an electric detonator. Once the detonator explodes, then it activates the chain of detonation. It will detonate the primer and then the main charge. Now, in conventional ordnance, you have limited quantity of explosive. For example, in an anti-personnel mine, if you step on it, 30 grams of explosive, it will blow off your foot. An anti-tank mine is about 6 kgs of explosive. It will blow off the track of a tank. Here, the quantity of explosive was as high as 100 kgs.
One explosive.
One explosive in a drum, packed,
Plastic drum having
packed under the road. They would have tunneled it from the side like a culvert, packed it there, and wire shayad nikal ke, they've taken it to the house or behind the bushes, good about 50 to 100 meters away, and anytime you could connect power to it. So they had an entire network of explosives laid out like this. And these are all IEDs, improvised explosive devices. Anything that is non-standard ordnance, non-standard, that is not made in any factory, is an improvised explosive device. And let me tell you, 60% of the casualties were due to explosives. So that was the biggest challenge. So we were taken by surprise initially. What are these guys doing? So when we realized that they are blowing it using electric detonators, we switched off the power. Okay. After that, they started using battery boxes fabricated by themselves. 6 batteries in a box with adequate current and a switch. Tak usko jodega and this thing blows up.
No need for any external
power source. No external power source. So they are masters of improvisation, and they did a great job. In fact, they made Johnny mines, an anti-personnel mine, small one in a wooden box. If you put your foot over it, that would blast. Okay. That's also homemade, cottage industry. Okay, it's not standard, right? So that's why I said the learnings were great, tremendous. Unparalleled. The only occasion in history where you find this kind of deployment of explosive was in Libya. If you've heard of Omar Mukhtar, right? He was a freedom fighter there. So he's the one who fought against the French in Libya, and he's the one who employed extensive use of explosives to blow up vehicles or personal carriers, armored personal carriers. So the LTT employed the same tactics here. So the initial few days we were taken aback, but then we, we responded with alacrity, and we made our own improvisations. We stopped moving on the road. We would move well away from the road, first clear the road, we would find explosives and then move our convoys. But the initial part of the operations, a lot of vehicles got blown up. My brigade's deputy commander's BMP, that Russian infantry combat vehicle, was blown up. So we lost all of them, deputy commander as well as the other troops in that. As you're aware, tanks were also blown up.
Right.
T-72s.
So even on the concrete tracks that the tanks and these vehicles moved, as far as I know, they had also, had huge amounts of explosives there, and the trigger wires, which played a very commendable job in dealing with the armed forces. So how did you all recognize it and came up with a countermeasure for it?
See, countermeasures, like I said, at that point of time, the only device that we had was Metex mine detector, right? So we realized that these guys have command wires going to a power source and that they're blowing up this huge quantity of explosive. So now we started looking for telltale signs. We realized that wherever there was a mine, these guys have a map. They had a map. It was all mapped out for them. So they knew exactly in front of which bungalow or which crossing, how many mines are laid or improvised explosive devices are laid. We didn't know, of course. So we learnt in just a few days' time that these chaps keep telltale signs, like a bell would be hung on a branch of a tree, or the tree had cuts with a knife. They would have made some markings, cross or some kind of marking or some alphabet or something like that. So one realized that yes, there's something, yahan pe kuch gadbad hai. So then you look more intently and cautious. You exercised caution, and there were tripwires too. Booby traps are activated by tripwires or a release mechanism. Like if you lift up something, that gets released and triggers off the detonator, or a pressure mechanism. So basically there are three mechanisms to activate an explosive: pressure, release and pull.
Okay.
For pull, what you have is a tripwire. You need to have a tripwire which is connected to the detonator, activator of the detonator, and then when somebody trips that wire, so that pulls the spring, and then that activates a pin which goes and hits the detonator, and then the detonator explodes and the explosive goes up, right? It detonates, causing damage. Now all their IEDs had shrapnel in the form of ball bearings, nails, pieces of iron. It was very lethal. You would have heard of Claymore mines,
right,
extensively used in the Vietnam War, but standard ordnance factory Claymore mines are just about less than a foot. These Claymore mines were, if you look at a truck and if you look at the grill of the truck, front grill, as big as that, this big,
okay,
this tall, this big, in a curved form, and deployed at crossings where when that blasts, it will kill whoever comes within 30 meters. That is for sure. That is a lethality. Fortunately, a lot of those were detected and diffused by us, right? By basically detaching the command wires or removing the activating mechanisms. So this was the greatest challenge to all the troops operating in the front lines. And we basically stumbled initially, yes, we did, but subsequently we learnt how to tackle, how to detect, and how to take countermeasures, and warn the infantry about the potential danger, right? And hats off to the infantry. In a lot of operations, they have worked without the sappers also, right?
right.
We have led, the sappers have led infantry columns. We have walked ahead of the tanks also. But hats off to the tankmen and the infantry officers and men. In large number of operations, they have operated without sappers, because sappers are a very rare commodity. For an entire division, you have only one regiment, one battalion. So sapper resources get divided as you go down. So in a brigade, you have a platoon which is supposed to be one officer, one JC and 54 men. But then when they also get divided among the battalions, resources are few and far between. So yes, infantry has had to deal with this threat, and they have also suffered tremendous casualties because of this. Now, other than this sapper element, let's talk of weapons.
Okay.
The basic weapon of a soldier was the self-loading rifle,
Right.
SLR 7.62 mm, right, which was archaic for that point of time. 1987, most armies had graduated to AK-47s. Very strangely, we were still using this 7.62 mm rifle. 7.62 mm rifle is single shot.
Right.
It's self-loading. I mean, you don't have to keep cocking like the 303. It's self-loading, but there's no automatic fire. So my experience, starting with Jaffna, then Vaunia in the jungles, and then in Trincomalee, my experience is that in an engagement, let's say you're out on an operation, you have gone for a cordon search of a suspected LTT camp or a sure shot LTT camp. The first engagement, in the first few seconds, if you cannot react with heavy volume of fire, you're finished, or you're bound to suffer tremendous casualties. And that is what happened. The LTT had AK-47s.
Right.
They had AK-47s, and they had probably M16s also. They would let loose a volley of gunfire, I mean a volley of bursts, and then we were responding with single shot SLRs. Our automatic fire came from the light machine gun, which is scaled at 1 light machine gun per 10 soldiers in the infantry or the engineers. We have 1 per 10. In every section you have a light machine gun. And that's not a very wieldy weapon. It's a very unwieldy weapon. I mean, it's heavy, big. It has got a bipod. You have to carry it. Then you have to deploy it first, lay it, and then fire. It's not a, fire from the hip. Yeah, you can't fire from the hip. So this was a drawback. It was a handicap. And this is a major handicap which has to be recognized, noted, registered, and taken note of by the higher ups, and not just the tacticians, the strategists. You neglect tactics and tactical requirements and give more importance to strategy. Strategy is very important, no doubt, but when strategy has to be deployed, when strategy has to be employed to achieve an aim, how do you do it? By employing tactics, right? So when you get tactical, you require the requisite weapons and the wherewithal. If you do not have that, how can you overcome the enemy? So this is one great shortcoming which people knew, but then over a period of time, yes, we are a big army, we are a big country, and it's only the wearer who knows where the shoe pinches. So it's the humble soldier who faces the brunt of everything. The officer leading the troops and the soldiers, right?
Do you see the same problem?
Very much, very much. There's a lag time between identifying, realizing that there's a lacuna in our resources or in our capabilities, and fulfilling that requirement. There's a huge gap. That is what we have to close. So we need to work towards achieving that, and I think the present government is on to it with Atmanirbhar Bharat and all that. So if we have in-house manufacturing ability, we should be able to produce and deliver fast, because the defense procurement procedure for getting things from abroad maybe very long, lengthy process. So for that you got to set your GSQRs, the General Staff Qualitative Requirements, and then there's a debate about that. If this will be there, that is not possible. If that is there, this won't be possible. Okay? But then we got to settle for the best. So that's one area we got to cover. Secondly, I understand your question. That's a very good question. Basically, if I'm not mistaken, what you're asking is not just regarding the weapons, it's regarding everything.
Right.
The equipment profile as such. Today, I think the equipment profile is much better. We've got AK-47s, we've got your pistols, machine pistols, and you've got better weapons for the officer also. Otherwise, the officer carried, in our time, we carried a Sten machine carbine, a magazine at 32 bullets, and that was World War II vintage, right? And the remnants of World War II vintage, the officers and JCOs were carrying in operations. I, as a youngster, as a second lieutenant, often wondered, yaar, ye kyun pakda diya? Why are we using this? And let me tell you, troops operating in the front lines, officers and men in Sri Lanka, they stopped carrying a Sten machine carbine. They either carried a rifle, the officer either carried a rifle himself, or he didn't carry a weapon, because an officer has to control the operations. A radio set is as important as a weapon.
Right.
Okay? So he was always on the radio set. Now, talking of a radio set, the LTT used to target officers. Jidhar radio set ka, where you see the antenna of the radio set, he knows the officer is next to that fellow. So they started sniping at officers.
Oh.
Yeah. So then you had to, keep the radio set, the radio guy 4 or 5 paces away. I mean, with 3-4 soldiers in between you when you're moving in a single line formation, let's say in the jungle like Vavuniya or Mullaty. So that was one thing. Another thing is, in Jaffna we learned quickly that don't wear ranks.
Okay.
Looking at your ranks also, the LTT snipers would take you on. That was the second thing. Then our helmets were so cumbersome and uncomfortable that if you had to operate swiftly in the jungle, you couldn't wear them. I mean, it was very uncomfortable. So a lot of units preferred to operate without helmets. Okay. Then your shoes, your boots, in the jungle, to operate with DM shoes is very inconvenient. It's very hot inside. So people prefer jungle shoes. But the jungle shoes supplied by the ordnance was very bad.
Okay.
I don't want to say too much about it. But then 2 weeks of extensive usage in the jungles and it was over. So that should not have been the quality of shoes given to us in Vavuniya's jungles. So I am forced to say this after 35 years. It's almost 35 years, isn't it, since the Sri Lanka operations? Yeah. So, I mean, we expected much better. But anyway, that's history. We have learned our lessons, and today we have the best shoes, the best small arms, and better grenades. Okay. Our Sten machine carbines, they have a habit of getting stuck, but they are no longer in use. So that's also gone. So that's how things were, and that's how things are today, right? Those days, while operating, we had fire support from Cheetah helicopters also. They had deployed machine guns on the Cheetah.
Okay.
And then they would fire at suspected enemy targets. But that was only an improvisation, and it was a very dangerous improvisation. Whereas the Sri Lankan army had Bell helicopters with machine guns on either side and very fast flying aircraft, and they could take on the LTT, and the LTT were really scared of those gun crews. So we learned from that also. Of course, we had a great resource in terms of the Akbar, our attack helicopters, the Me-25s. They would come and fire rockets at the suspected target, LTT camp, and that caused a lot of destruction. The LTT were afraid of the attack helicopters, the Akbars we used to call them, right? So this is what I saw in the operations. As a youngster operating with infantry battalions, I operated with 13 Sikalai, 4-5 Gurkhas and 5 Rajput. So as an engineer officer, I had the privilege and the good fortune of operating with these 3 battalions, and each of these battalions, they had great soldiers, great officers. I remember Lieutenant Colonel Randhir Sethi, who was the CO, commanding officer of 13 Sikalai, a fantastic leader and a great officer in operations. I have seen him in operations. I have operated under him. We had Lieutenant Colonel IBS Bawa, who was commanding 45GR. Tremendous, fantastic officer. Unfortunately, we lost him in Jaffna. He was killed in action in Jaffna. And 5 Rajput. I operated in Vavuniya with them. And subsequently, when our brigade moved to Trincomalee, we were associated there also. At that point of time, 5 Rajput was commanded by then Lieutenant Colonel Milan Naidu, who retired as Vice Chief, Lieutenant General Milan Naidu. He's in Bhopal. And one thing I learned from 5 Rajput and General Naidu, then Lieutenant Colonel Naidu, is that operations, success in your operations, one of the parameters of success is minimum casualties. I mean, we have a very skewed understanding that so many killed means you were in great action. That's not the point. The point is, if you can achieve your aim, achieve your goal by avoiding casualties, or rather taking minimal casualties, that is real success, actually. The other case is different. In an unfortunate situation where things can't be helped, like 13 Sikalai, I mean, it was not their fault. Situation was such, and at the strategic level, people's understanding was skewed. That is why they put them in that situation, and therefore they suffered, right? So that's how things are, and I carry those memories with me, and I mean, I have great regard and respect for all those officers and men with whom I operated. I'll again repeat the units: 13 Sikalai, 4-5 GR and 5 Rajput. And my brigade, 72 Infantry Brigade, initially our brigade commander was Brigadier B.D. Mishra. He got posted out in Vavuniya, and a new brigade commander came in. Then Brigadier Shivaji Patil.
Okay.
He retired as a Major General. Brigadier Shivaji Patil, later Major General, was a great leader. I mean, it was a privilege to have got a chance to operate under him. A very brave man, a ground soldier, fantastic. He had a feel of the ground, he had a feel of the enemy, what they will do next. And he gave us full freedom to take our own decisions and operate. He just wanted that the results should come home. That's all. Okay. So there again, in our headquarters, I have had the privilege and the good fortune of having served under such fantastic leaders like Brigadier Patil, Shivaji Patil, later Major General Patil, and our brigade major also, I remember, Major Mandana, later Colonel Mandana. In the heat of operations in Jaffna, he kept his cool. I mean, monitoring 3 battalions plus associated troops like us, sappers, signals, the communications, movement of vehicles, in the thick of battle. He was great, fantastic. Finally, about my own subunit, my field company. I was part of 394 Field Company, which was part of 270 Engineer Regiment. 270 Engineer Regiment headquarters was deployed in Trincomalee, Clappenburg Bay, and we were, the fighting elements were in Jaffna initially. So after the capture of Jaffna, 72 Infantry Brigade moved to Vavuniya. So 394 Field Company also moved there. The other two companies, 395 Field Company and 183 Field Company, they remained in Jaffna with their respective brigades and continued to operate till we de-inducted in 1989, November. They also did a tremendous job, and we have stalwarts like Colonel Chakravarti, Colonel Dikshit, then Colonel, these people were all majors that time. They retired as colonels. Then Major Magan Kumar, then Captain Khan, retired as colonel. He commanded the unit. I.A. Khan, Ramanuj Sharma, Colonel Suhag, very highly qualified officer. In my company, we had Major Vaswani, and my company 2IC. He was Colonel Anil Kumar Garg. Both of them were awarded mention in dispatches for their role in Jaffna operations. Okay. And of course, our troops distinguished themselves, and they earned a very good name for the Bombay Sappers. One of the most experienced and appreciated units of the Bombay Sappers and the Corps of Engineers, 270 Engineer Regiment. And we celebrated our Golden Jubilee in 2016. That's an aside, when it was deployed in Ladakh. Okay. Right? So that way I'm proud to be a Bombay Sapper. And what is most important is we are proud of the fact that basically by training we are an infantry soldier. Our technical abilities, technical qualifications and technical skills are an addition. But when there is no requirement of our technical skills or abilities, we function as normal infantry, right? So we take up defenses in a defended sector. If you finished all your engineer tasks, you have to look after a particular area, defend that against the enemy. So that's what the role of the engineers is. And performing our role in Sri Lanka, not just my unit, there were other units too, 110 Engineer Regiment, 115 Engineer Regiment from the Bombay Sappers. There were Bengal Sapper units, there were Madras Sapper units, 3 engineers, 4 engineers, Engineer Regiment, they are from Madras Sappers. Okay. They also did a fantastic job in Vavonia, Mullativ, and they have also earned accolades. So a sapper, by virtue of the nature of his tasks, is a very tough guy, and the elements are always challenging us, you know, but then we learn to adjust, we learn to overcome all difficulties in the field and achieve our tasks. Plus we are trained infantry soldiers. Correct. That is what sets us apart from the other arms and services. Okay.
And how did all the learning from Sri Lanka was or contributed to the operations during the Kargil War?
Well, that's a great question. See, in Kargil War, our role was slightly different. We had to construct tracks. Basically, my unit was deployed in Batalik, and you have the Indus River thundering down, and to the northern part of the Indus River, you have the mountain range, and troops are deployed on the LC, line of control. Basically, our area, we had to construct tracks up till the forward posts. There were inadequate communication facilities. So our main task was, first combat task was to construct track. Second task was to construct habitat. That is, you didn't have a place for the troops to live or deploy. Like you need to store ammunition, you need to store explosive, you need to have living quarters. It was grossly inadequate. There were no, probably at the high levels, we didn't have that appreciation that there will be a requirement for so many troops to live there. It is only after the incursion. We had an agreement with Pakistan that nobody would occupy the bunkers on the line of control. Okay. We would stay away. But then they broke that understanding. Mr. Musharraf, General Musharraf, he is the one who thought that he can come on the sly and occupy those bunkers, and then he will threatened the Zojila, Dras, Kargil axis, the road that goes to Kargil and beyond to Batalik, and then from there he would cut off this road so that supplies to Siachen will be affected. So once he cuts off the road to Siachen, supply route to Siachen, then he should be in a better position to attack and take Siachen. I mean, that was his understanding, which is well nigh impossible, because our troops are well ensconced in Siachen, well placed now. It's not so easy to dislodge them, right? But then, of course, balance of the history, he didn't succeed. Our troops bravely went and assaulted and recaptured those heights at great cost, of course. We lost a lot of officers and men. But question that you asked as to, from the learnings of Sri Lanka, did you find them useful in the Kargil war?
Right.
First and foremost, our troops, see, from 89 to 99 is a 10-year gap. So the youngsters of 1989 had become, of middle seniority in 99. They had experienced combat. They were used to being under fire. They have seen what it is to be fired upon by the enemy, and when there is a chaos all around you, how to keep your cool and operate. So whether officers were at that major lieutenant colonel level at that time, so they were all company commanders, okay? And they are the ones who actually physically command the fighting troops. As far as the JCOs and NCOs were concerned, NCOs were senior NCOs, and some of them had already become JCOs, right? So they had prior experience of being in combat, so it was nothing new to them. They knew गोली कैसे आएगी, बम कैसे फटेगा, मोटर फटेगा तो कैसे आवाज़ आती है, ये गोली जा रही है ऊपर से तो ये AK-47 का है या some other weapon small arm का है. That was the experience of those soldiers, officers and men, which they carried to Kargil. I can say that about my unit. There were other units who had served in Lanka and then were deployed in the Kargil war. And I can say about the infantry and the sappers also, it gave them tremendous amount of confidence. So having been war veterans before, 2 years plus deployment is not a joke.
Right.
And then coming into operations in Kargil, you had that confidence and you had that maturity, because a lot of wisdom had come into everybody's head, ki, karna kya hai, how to react or respond in a particular situation. So that is what our learning, that is the way in which our learning helped us in Kargil operations, Operation Vijay.
So how has been the attitude of the Indian masses or their response to the IPKF operations and the legacy issues that still persist?
See, to talk about myself, I was a youngster. I was just a second lieutenant initially when I went into the island in Operation Pawan. And when we went into operations, the first leave that I went was after about 6 months. And 6 months is quite a long time, being in operations and being deployed in a combat area. I was really surprised that when I reached home, I mean, public perception was practically zero. I mean, they didn't know much about what is happening. हाँ, तुम लंका से आ रहे, so what's happening there? वो news में कुछ सुना कि so many people got killed, but why have you gone there? What is this accord about? And suddenly, how did you start fighting the LTT? And the common question was, how many did you kill?
Okay.
I mean, people who are educated and supposed to be mature, they are asking such questions. So, what I understood was that there is a big communication problem. Those days, there was no mass media the way it is today. Today, mass media has proliferated to such an extent that, you have uncountable number of channels, right? TV channels. Those days, it was only Doordarshan, right? So, whatever Doordarshan told you, you listened to. So, every day they would say, 3 died, 1 officer was killed here in Vavunya, something happened, this and that. So, people couldn't care less. So, I found that nobody could care less. Arey, kuch ho raha hai udhar, theek hai. So that was very demoralizing, firstly. Because you came on leave, you're coming from a combat zone, and then people don't understand that you have come from a place where you could have lost your life. So that is one thing I found very funny.
The gravity was not.
The gravity of the situation was just not known, and secondly, people are not interested in knowing.
Okay.
That's the sad part. So why was it like that? Was it done deliberately? Possibly. It was done deliberately by the government or the party in power, because if something negative is happening, then it reduces your prospects of being, retaining power in the next session.
Right.
So I must say that the government did nothing to improve public perception. When the public cannot perceive or understand what their army or forces are doing outside, it's out of your area. It's an out of area operation. I mean, it is not within your area of operation. Why have we gone there? The government owed an explanation to the public. It should have been clarified to the public why we were there, how our army is performing, what they are doing to ensure that we have victory or we achieve all our goals. Nothing of that sort. There was no media management, there was no public perception management in that time. So it gave a feeling that neither is the public concerned about us nor the government of the day. So if the government of the day is not concerned, then what is the opposition doing? Neither was the opposition concerned. So all in all, it was an attitudinal problem. No. Right? It was an attitudinal problem. And that did not contribute much to uplifting the morale of the troops. The Jawans, the soldiers, subordinates and the officers equally felt that this was an area which needed a lot of improvement, needed a lot of addressing, which never happened. Right? Second thing, even when troops were being de-inducted from Lanka, there was no formal welcome or formal appreciation or anything of that sort. It was routine. It is kind of routine. Okay, aage chalo, aage badho, something like that. So when your army comes back after losing a lot of lives or having tried to perform the task allotted to them to the best of their abilities, the least one expects is a word of appreciation. Because let me tell you, our army is not given to rape, loot and plunder. This is what distinguishes us from other armies of the world. You look back in history or you look at today's situation, anywhere in the world where there is conflict, you look at how the troops are operating. Today you have the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. You're well aware of what is happening where.
Right.
You're well aware of what happened in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan. Americans were there. There were European troops also. So who did what is well known to everybody. Did anything of that sort happen in Sri Lanka? Have you heard even now? I mean, after 30 years, 30 plus years? No. This is what distinguishes our Army, Navy and Air Force. Our men, we never indulge in this kind of activity. Probably it is our cultural heritage that makes us like that. And we have shown it in the 71 war also. After the 71 war, how we treated the Paki officers and soldiers who were in captivity, good about 93,000 of them. All of them carried good memories back home, but of no use. Right? So anyway, that's again an aside, but this is what it is. As far as legacy issue is concerned, the least we require is commemoration of the Ipkf. There were 4 divisions which operated in Sri Lanka of the Indian Army. There was a fleet of ships which were operating. There was a large number of aircraft, transport aircraft, attack helicopters. Your fighters, of course, were not involved. So, don't you think that the country owes it to all the men who fought there, who operated there? Remember their contribution at least once a year. You set a date like you have Kargil Vijay Divas.
Right.
and you have celebration of 71 war victory, but you don't commemorate 62 operations, the Chinese aggression. There's nothing wrong if you have been beaten back or if you've taken a beating from the enemy. In 62, yes, we did take a beating. All because the political understanding was inadequate and our troops were not equipped adequately. That is why we ended up losing ground, which of course came back to us subsequently. But we ought to commemorate each and every operation that our soldiers fought, because in none of these operations, right from the beginning, why talk of post-independence? Pre-independence, when we fought for the British in the Second War, in the First World War, there's not a single occasion in history, recorded history, that any of Indian troops have run away from the battlefield or there are many troops who have run away from battlefield, be it Europeans or Africans or Russians or Japanese. Our men, North Indian, South Indian, East Indian, West Indian, none of them have left a battlefield. Once on the battlefield, he is either accomplished his task or he is given his life. This is what distinguishes the Indian soldier. Would you like that quality to be retained and continue in our forces? Yes, you would like. Absolutely. But how will the soldier be motivated and encouraged to do that? Yes. When you don't even remember that so many thousands had gone and so many died. Sri Lanka, 1300 odd had died. 3,000 soldiers, officers and men have been maimed. Today they are disabled. Don't you feel that if once in a year you should be able to commemorate a day for them? It's a requirement.
So, makes me ask on the commemoration part, do you feel that somewhere a deliberate act of concealing the so-called wrongly taken decisions and the
that is one angle to it. And whichever government was in power that time and the party may not like to showcase that operation. We're not saying showcase. You don't have to showcase anything. You just remember, okay, on this day our troops had gone abroad. They tried their best. Within the given resources. They achieved most of the goals. Okay. What they could not sustain was due to inadequacy of resources and inadequate directions. Right? There was no orientation. The Ipkf officer and the soldier actually did not know what is the larger aim of getting into these operations. So when you do not know the larger aim, when you feel that kal tak to they were our friends, today we are fighting them. So what is the gain in this? Do we have a strategic aim? Do we have something strategic to gain from this? No. There was no understanding at any level. Right? So it demoralizes the forces. Okay? So the request is, or the earnest feeling among the veterans is that because our troops landed up on July 29th in Jaffna, you can have July 29th as a day of commemoration. All that is required is you remember them at the War Memorial, lay a wreath. Let's say, for example, if our Prime Minister gives a speech that day and remembers the sacrifices of our troops abroad, that itself is enough. Right? To assuage the feelings of veterans who are alive today, and that itself is enough to remember, commemorate and remember the men who laid down their lives, who are no longer with us, so that their families also feel, yes, my son, my brother, my husband died for something worthwhile. Right? So let us try and frame what was that worthwhile thing for which lives were lost. Even if you're confused about it, even if there is no clarity of thought, it needs to be framed right now.
Right.
The Army, Navy and Air Force went there in absolute obedience of the government's orders. The government and the country should be proud that their services, that their troops, that their armed forces are such that they do not have any powers of any ambitions of power, unlike the Pakistani army or any other force anywhere in the world, right?
Correct.
So that itself is proof about the proof of the quality of your troops, of your officers and armed forces, right?
Right.
So the country owes it to them, and that's our very humble expectation and demand, that this should happen, so that the families also, they feel they have that sense of pride that my husband, son, brother died for a worthy cause.
Now being recognized.
Now being recognized. At least now, better late than never. Otherwise, you make a big, I won't say song and dance, if you must celebrate all operations. But it's not that you should celebrate only spectacular victories or something, right? You have Kargil Vijay Divas, have something for the IPKF too. We also fought there 2 years, more than 2 years. Is not a small time. I mean, we've done it in our youth, right? So that's what I tell my friends. When you were floating around in college, I was fighting in operations there. And, today you don't even ask me. Then they say, nahi, abhi pata chal raha hai. So now they are reading up. Oh, acha, aise bhi tha. Acha, you were there. Acha, this is what it is. So that's why we say, at least do it now.
The bare minimum needs.
The bare minimum. At least commemorate it. Have a day. And then commemorate, and at the same time, let's not repeat our follies. Let's not repeat our mistakes of not equipping our troops properly. I mean, whole circle coming back to our case, Sappers. We don't even have a decent explosives detector.
Even today.
Even today. So, what is it? There is equipment available in the market, in the international market. You have a device, the Americans are using that. They have a sensor going ahead, and when that senses the presence of a particular chemical, then it gives a feedback.
Okay.
Yeah, and then it buzzes. It gives you at what distance it is and what is the area. So you can isolate that point and move ahead. Nobody needs to go and step on that. Or if you want to neutralize it, you can instantly put explosive and neutralize it.
Do you feel that the need for equipment, procurement delays has been, I would say, an everlasting, thing, at least now. Let it be the CQB carbines or, the immediate requirements that we have. Do you feel somewhere we are delaying because of the vision of using indigenized products?
Yes, for this I would say that the polity, that is the leadership at the government, in the government, needs to have a clear understanding. It's good, Atmanirbhar Bharat is the best thing that has happened. But we must have understand that there is a gestation period.
Correct.
So today if you want to start making a rifle or an automatic rifle, small arms, automatic small arms, you have to start from the drawing board, because if you ask for qualitative requirements from the army, they'll take out the best qualities from everything and tell you, I want this, which is not possible actually. But then you take all the possible qualities, qualitative requirements, and then you start from the drawing board. By the time you arrive at a certified design, it will take some time, right? And after you incorporate all your requirements, when you put it into production and mass production, there's a gestation period.
Right.
So to cover the gestation period, we need to procure from abroad. Like we have done now, small arms, we've procured a few lakhs for our frontline troops.
But
Right.
even when we speak about, these are the, I think we wait for, the
We wait
buzzer
for catastrophe.
Yeah, right.
It is all, yeah. See, let me tell you, in the Kargil war, our fighter aircraft, the fighter bombers, we don't call them fighter bombers any longer, we call them multi-role aircraft, fighter aircraft. They did not have target designators. So they were dropping bombs, they would fall with a terminal trajectory, and if your target was there, then it would be destroyed. Otherwise, it was falling right, left, and center. So they procured Israeli target designators, laser designators, and then that's how our fighter aircraft are supposed to have accurately bombed enemy bunkers and all that. Did we have to wait for that situation?
Correct.
As a point. But I'm sure the Air Force would have made requests, put up requirements. But then red tapeism is rampant in our system, and then that delays everything. Right. Similar is the case for equipment for Siachen. Although today we are very well equipped and all that, but then this bugbear of red tapeism is there. And that is what has caused delay in procurement, delay in changing over to new technologies, be it communications or be it in very niche areas like explosive detection. The sapper is still without a proper explosive detector. There are no countermeasures. So you're carrying on with what is there in your legacy inventory, which is of no use now in the present context, right? So we need to improve on that. But then Atmanirbhar Bharat is a very good initiative. We just need to cater for the gestation period. Right. And we need to give opportunities to the best of the best. There you should not show favoritism. Then again we're ending up in disaster. Correct. So the equipment that is going to be delivered should be of absolutely high quality, so that the safety of the soldier is not hampered. You see, your soldier, officer and your soldiers are a very precious resource of the country. You have spent so much. Firstly, they are selected after deep selection. They are a special lot, imbibed with certain qualities, right? Now, those qualities plus high morale will deliver the goods in operations. Right. So, what are you going to do to ensure that the morale will be high? First thing is give them the best equipment and give it when they need it. After the operation is over, you bring in the best equipment, what is the use?
Wait for another operation. Probably then these would be outdated.
That would be either obsolete or obsolescent. So obsolescent is when the thing is getting obsolete. Yeah. So that is what it is. Finally, to close our conversation, I would just like to say, in all humility, it was a great pleasure and a privilege to serve in the armed forces, that is in the army in my case, and within the army in the Corps of Engineers, and within the Corps of Engineers in the Bombay Sappers, of which I am extremely proud about. And my unit, 270 Engineer Regiment, I'm extremely proud of my unit too, and my unit has been operating in very critical areas. Secondly, before I close, I would like to request the audience to update their knowledge about the armed forces, the relevance of the armed forces, and what for they exist, right, and what the country owes them. The biggest problem is that the public are the ones. In a democracy, it is the public which votes a party to power or elects their representatives. So once you elect your representatives, you have to hold them accountable for everything, for governance, in terms of administering the country, for the laws made, and for the equipping the armed forces, developing the armed forces, maintaining them in fighting condition. But I see that that kind of awareness or sense of responsibility is not there among people. People don't want to update themselves, don't want to ask questions. They do not ask questions to the government or the representatives in power. Look, why is our army like this? Why is their uniform like this? It's not good enough. Isn't it?
Correct.
So you should ask questions. and make the government accountable, whichever party in power. We are not concerned with which party is in power or anything. But who is governing, he should be accountable to the people. Right? So that accountability will come only when people improve their awareness and show their awareness by recognizing the goods delivered in the right manner by the armed forces, and where there are issues, by asking questions to the elected representatives.
And a tough question is not disrespectful.
Absolutely. So this is my humble request to the public at large. Please be involved in the governance and ask questions about your armed forces. The more you ask, the better armed force you will get, the better will be the morale of the forces fighting for you. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Jai Hind.